What's up? Hi, friends. So, I thought it would be interesting today to talk through the scapegoat mechanism. This is a talk that I've had planned for a very long time, but I just never had the opportunity to actually do it with a group of people. I think because it is very exposing. The times I've had the chance to talk about it, people are like, oh my goodness, this happens everywhere. Unfortunately, even within church culture, the larger culture, all of that. There's so much going on here. So, what I've done is I've distilled it down to stick figures that I can do with my iPad here. See this? So, what we're going to do is actually talk through 6 stages. Let's call it 6. And in order to do that, all you have to do is just sit back, enjoy, and watch the drawings as I explain them as they happen. Okay? Let's do this. So once upon a time, humans organized in groups. Of course, right? That doesn't sound too shocking. But back in the day, people used to gather, and let's say one person in the party used to be the troublemaker. They used to cause a lot of problems. Let's say one of these stick figures is an alcoholic, okay? And because they're an alcoholic, they rummage through the town at night, they cause problems, all that. But no one wants to call them out on it. And as a result, the townspeople start to get more and more frustrated. There's an increase of anger and disappointment and misplaced impatience towards one another. And so back in the day, in ancient culture, people used to take then a goat. I know, right? This is one of the best goats you've ever seen. Let's draw a little tail. And let's draw this. There's a nice little goatee on this guy. Let's give him some horns. And so there's a little goat. Well, what would happen is in ancient culture, they would take the goat and then they would take all their misplaced and displaced anger and fury and rage and throw it on the goat. So let's write those down. Shame, blame, anger, anxiety. Okay. They would throw all of it onto the goat, and the goat then had to go off and die. This was known as being scapegoated. This is the scapegoat mechanism, obviously. But then, let's draw a nice little forest over here. Okay. And the goat then, under penalty of death, would then be kicked out of the town and into the wilderness. So let's write wilderness. Okay. And of course, let's also write down some of the things that are happening. There is exclusion, but more than that, let's say death by exclusion. The goat would be kicked out, left out, and they were never supposed to return. So let's also put that. Now, this is what's known as the scapegoat mechanism. Here's some of the positives, if you want to call it that. The community then no longer has misplaced or displaced shame, anger, or anxiety on one another because they projected all of it onto the goat. So that meant that for a time, the community would be relieved. Oh, good, we expelled the problem. We got rid of the problem. We excluded the problem, got rid of the problem. However, one of those stick figures is still an alcoholic or something else. And as a result of that, a number of things would happen. First off, the real problem is never really addressed. a fake solution was offered, but the real problem was not really addressed. And maybe the other stick figures here actually know what the real problem is. Next up, the scapegoat mechanism allows the guilty party to maintain its innocence, but then also there has to be a new scapegoat. And so another goat would have to be found, and it would be found on somewhat of a regular routine basis. And so in ancient culture, sometimes this would happen once a month, once a year, every 5 years, and this role became very important. And it slowly evolved over into becoming the sacrificial system of a lot of religious frameworks. Let's find something around here to sacrifice so that we don't really have to sacrifice ourselves. Ooh, interesting. There's displaced death. Rather than this individual who's causing the problems to die to themselves, they kill something else. Death by exclusion, never to return. Okay? So there's a few things going on here. And unfortunately, this is one of the most common means by which people create community. And so a collective can gather together around who they exclude. And they know that they're in the right because they exclude the right person. However, if one of these stick figures says, the goat's not really the problem is Frank over there, or Jesse, or something like that. Well, that person would then have the ability to potentially be scapegoated themselves. And so, sometimes, instead of sending out the goat into the wilderness, sometimes communities would kick out, exclude, death by exclusion, never to return, the person in the community that's the truth teller. And so sometimes it would be a literal goat, but then sometimes it would be, Brian kept pointing out that Frank's the problem, so they would get rid of Brian. And so the scapegoat mechanism has the ability to also scare other people from saying things out loud, such as being a whistleblower. Because if you become a whistleblower, then you might be kicked out of the community just the same. And this is the scapegoat mechanism, the scapegoat phenomenon. It happens in communities, of course. It happens in nations. It happened in politics in the recent years when it was said, people from other countries, they're bringing their worst. We need to kick them out. Make sure it's just us. You see what I mean? But then not only in politics, in that sense, internationally, you can see this with the people on the far left or the people on the far right. They want to throw all the shame, blame, anger, and anxiety for all the issues of the culture on the other party. And so if you're ever watching the news or you're paying close enough attention to how it's being framed, you can hear it. They're just scapegoating again. They're not really looking at the problems. They want to say the problem is fixed by exclusion. But Rene Girard, who was a French sociologist, theologian, social critiquer, writer, author, he noticed that Jesus did something fascinating with all of this, because he seemed to take the scapegoat mechanism and subvert it. Ready? Let's add a few things. Here we go. So let's say instead, I don't want to use that. Let's use black for now. There were the religious authorities and the political authorities of the day. This would be the Pharisees, the politicians, the Romans. And they saw that Jesus was being a troublemaker. And so he wasn't really causing any problems. He was saying, hey, you blind Pharisees. Or he would say things like, those who live by the sword die by the sword. Or instead of giving into a culture of scarcity and commerce and capitalism, he would give into just giving out free bread. And as a result of it, he was somehow exposing the real dynamics. So let's draw Jesus. Okay. And he's got a really long robe on. Let's draw a little halo just so we know. Hey, there he is smiling. But Jesus, maybe we should draw a beard just for the sake of it. Jesus had a beard and some hair. Let's do that. That's funny. But then the religious and political leaders of the day saw that Jesus was challenging their status quo. And so they threw all their shame, blame, anger, and anxiety that they really should have saved for themselves and let that be something that convicts them into becoming better people in how they lead. They threw all their shame, blame, anger, and anxiety onto Jesus, who then was sent to death by exclusion outside of his own city, Jerusalem. So let's also draw, let's do it this way. There you go. Let's also put Golgotha. That's understood as the name for the mount outside of Jerusalem where Jesus was crucified. He was sent by death, by exclusion, never to return. All the shame, blame, and anger and anxiety of all the people, the religious and the political and even the Jews of the day, they threw all their derision at Jesus. And they thought, good, the revolutionary's dead. But here we go. That's just the first half of the scapegoat mechanism. And we can say that is the unhealthy way of creating community. This happens in middle school all the time. It happens in high school, happens in colleges, happens in workplaces, happens in families. Sometimes the scapegoat or the Christ figure is the only person to actually tell the truth about the system. And that's why they are often then made into the scapegoat. They're killed, excluded, shamed, blamed, thrown anger upon them, and all the anxieties of the culture are thrown on them. But like I said, there's more to the Jesus story. So let's draw this. That's the tomb with the stone rolled away. And we can say this is the garden. Yeah. Let's call it Easter Garden. Because what happens is Jesus then does not stay out. Jesus returns. Let's draw. I don't like that halo. Let's change that just a moment. Oof. This is just fun. There's with his beard. Jesus then returns, and something interesting happens because he subverts all the expectations that are supposed to happen of the scapegoat. Let's make this, let's do it green because that sounds regenerative. So then we have resurrection, and we can say return. Jesus is the scapegoat that came back from death by exclusion and did not stay out in the wilderness, Golgotha, but instead returned. And so there's a few things that happen there. Jesus then comes back with forgiveness, love. Let's put accountability. And an invitation to repent. We can say it that way. And so what Jesus does, well, let's also just put hospitality. What Jesus does is he comes back to the community and he ends up, what's going on there? Oh. He comes back to the community and he gives them a new set of codes and morals by which to live by. Okay. Now, all of this is known as the scapegoat mechanism. And just as I said before, the top half of this drawing, it is describing how unhealthy communities do community. So let's write that. Unhealthy community building. Let's put that in quotation marks because it's not really community. Down here, let's put healthy community building. Because across the top, that is what spiritually unhealthy communities do. And you can actually kind of see it. There are ways in which religious culture encourages it. And there's even a sense in which some people define their maturity of faith according to who they exclude. So certain denominations that either line up more conservative or more liberal, they feel as though they're being healthy and mature according to who they exclude. When actually, it seems as though, according to the scapegoat mechanism and how Rene Girard talks about the Jesus movement, Jesus seems far more interested in this, building communities based on forgiveness, love, hospitality of the other, accountability to even the people at the top as well as the bottom, invitations to repent, the ability to turn your life around without being excluded because of the mistakes you've made. And so we have here unchristian and Christian modes of going about community. And there are people such as Richard Rohr, but also many others. What's his name? James something. I'll have to remember it later. But they talk about how Jesus uniquely reveals the lie that scapegoating is effective, and actually shows that it's terribly ineffective because that's not a right word. Is that a word? The scapegoat mechanism is ineffective at creating sustainable community because it just excludes. In some ways, it's cancel culture. And when you constantly exclude, you're literally only having a smaller and smaller community. And then you only bring in people that exclude the same people as you, which is absolute nonsense. It has nothing to do with the Jesus movement if you think in that capacity, if you love in that capacity, if you do community in that way. So let's wrap it up. Instead of the scapegoat mechanism across the top, this sounds cliche, we can say this is the lamb's mechanism for creating community. That the most mature people in a community are not the ones that exclaim who we should exclude. As long as you're playing the game of exclusion, you're not mature yet. But as soon as you are able to get to that high place of spiritual, emotional, psychological maturity and health, real maturity is based upon who you can include, who you can make space for, who you can be hospitable towards. Can you give love and forgiveness to your enemies, to the people that have wronged you? Are you able to do that? Because when Jesus returns, what he did is he actually exposed the truly guilty parties, because he really wasn't the guilty one, and that's what made him invincible. He came back, and his sheer return kind of shined a light on the fact that, oh, the scapegoat mechanism doesn't work in this instance, and it broke the code. It broke the rules of how everyone thought community was supposed to be done. And so, empires do the top half of this chart. Empires create community according to who they exclude or kill. But the ecclesia is different from the empire. The ecclesia creates community according to the resurrection narrative of Jesus, not by the crucifixion narrative of empire. Oh, so good. Now, what's interesting is this story has been right in front of us the whole time. You can be so close to the Jesus story and read it and focus on it and highlight it every Easter, but really every Sunday, and yet not see that Jesus is directly challenging scapegoating, exclusion, the use of shame, blame, anger, and anxiety to be weaponized against other people. And so it's really quite ironic, paradoxical, that we can have spiritual communities that are grounded in the Jesus story, but are places that are full of shame, blame, anger, anxiety, exclusion, and unhealthy community building. So, all this goes to say, now that you know this, you're not allowed to give into it anymore. Now that you know this, you're not allowed to just sit back, which is why I wanted to title this Save the Goat. Okay? Whenever you see someone else being scapegoated, go stop it before it happens, before it gets finished. Whenever you see people starting to rally in order to scapegoat someone else, shut down that narrative. And if someone is about to be scapegoated, do the Jesus thing and go be scapegoated with them. If you can't stop it, it's better to be there with the goat than to be there with the people who ostracize the goat and kick them out, because that's what the lamb would do. Yeah. So this has been Save the Goat. And what was the subtitle we called this? I forget. But let's take a look. This was a principle, understanding the scapegoat mechanism. And then if you want to look it up, by Rene Girard. Here you go. And I think I'm going to save this exact drawing. I'm going to put up on my website. So if that interests you, go to my website and then you'll be able to download this, save this to your phone, print it out, and talk it through with someone else. Okay? Go spread the good news of the Lamb's mechanism for creating community. Okay? Thank you so much. All right. We'll see you again. Cheers.